Are you sure the horse is the problem? Hey, welcome back to Riding Through, the Midlife Rider Project podcast. I'm Karen, and today we're talking about something that I think every rider has experienced, but maybe hasn't put into words yet. That thing where you realize your horse is not actually the problem, or more specifically, that thing where you realize your horse is doing exactly what you're asking, just not what you meant to ask. And those two things are not always the same. This happens to all of us, beginner, experienced, it doesn't matter. And at midlife, when we're bringing a lot more life into the arena with us than we used to, it happens in some really interesting ways. So let's get into it. The relationship between horse and rider is one of the more fascinating things about riding or spending time with horses because it's genuinely a two-way street. We affect our horses and they affect us, not just in the obvious training sense, but in this constant real time conversation that's happening through our bodies, whether we're paying attention or not. We've talked in previous episodes about how we show up for our horses and what we bring into the ride and the physical and mental stuff that we carry with us. And today, I want to stay in that conversation, but I want to look at it from a slightly different angle, which is what they are telling us. What information is coming back the other way? Because it's a lot if you know how to read it or what to look for. Horses don't respond to what we think we're doing, they respond to what we are actually doing. And that distinction matters a lot more than most of us realize when we're starting out riding, and probably more than we want to admit, even after we've spent years in the saddle. Here's a simple way to look at it. You're thinking about something, work, the conversation that you had earlier, whatever it is, and you're looking left, just slightly, just enough that your body weight has shifted and your hip has dropped a little bit, maybe, and your hand has come over with it, and your horse drifts left. And your first instinct is to correct the horse because he's going the wrong direction. But you were steering him there. You just weren't aware of it. That's such a common thing, and it sounds so basic when you say it out loud, but it's actually a really good example of how much information our horses are processing from us all the time. They don't make decisions in a vacuum. They're responding to our input from our weight, our breath, our tension, our attention, our energy, all of it. And when you understand it, it changes how you troubleshoot or figure out a problem. Instead of starting with what the horse is doing wrong, you start with what might be coming from you. That's a shift. And it takes some honesty and willingness to look at yourself first, which might not be our natural instinct. The emotional stuff is part of this too, because we've all shown up to the barn after a brutal day, tired, frazzled, our heads still full of whatever the last meeting of the day was or the residue of the last conversation we just had. And the horse knows immediately. They're reading our face, they're reading our energy, our body, our breath, the quality of our movement, and the tension that we're holding. And not only are they reading it, but they're also responding to it. But here's the thing I love about this, it goes both ways. Because most of us already know what it's like to show up completely wrung out, thinking that you probably shouldn't even ride today. And then you tack up and you get on, and 15 minutes later, something has changed. And the horse did that. They've worked that magic that only a horse can do. And just by being present with them, of having to show up and pay attention, you're pulled out of wherever your head was, and now you're somewhere different. And that's usually somewhere better. That's the relationship working. The longer you're with one particular horse, the more you start to recognize patterns. And this is where awareness becomes a real tool. Maybe you notice your horse gets looky or tense on the days when you are anxious. You're unsettled, and so they are too. Or maybe things fall apart in a particular part of the arena on days when you're in your head, when you're thinking instead of riding. There's a difference in how a horse goes when you're paying attention versus when you're technically present but mentally checked out. And horses are really good about pointing that difference out. Or maybe, and I find this one really interesting, you've noticed that when you're genuinely relaxed and happy to be there, the horse is different, softer, easier to ride, more with you. These patterns are awareness, and that's useful. It's information that will help you. Maybe you remember this too. When riding as a beginner and the instructor seemed to know exactly what was happening, even when they couldn't see your offside because the horse was telling on you, I was always somewhat flummoxed by that. But now I get it. There are situations that come up in riding where the instinct is to fix the horse, and the real answer is to look inward first. It might look like the horse rushing or not settling into a canter rhythm or surging forward, or you have to half halt every stride. But what you're doing isn't really quite working. At some point, looking inward can help you assess if it's how you're riding or how you're breathing or maybe not breathing. When the horse is tense, bracy, or resistant, you have already checked all the usual things like teeth and back and saddle fit, and you still can't figure out what's going on. Then one day you're riding with someone else who points out to you that you're holding your breath and gripping a bit. And when you stop doing those things, your horse improves too. I used to ride a horse that avoided the same corner every single ride. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on and how to ride it. If you've dealt with this, then maybe you have run through a similar checklist of things like, am I tense? Am I holding my breath? Am I doing something different at this spot? Turns out that while it wasn't how I was riding him, it was about how another rider was riding him in that corner. He'd spook and she'd hit him with a crop for spooking. And so every time he approached that corner, he expected to get hit and was reacting accordingly. None of this means that the horse is always right or that you're always the problem. Sometimes the horse just has a bad day. Sometimes there's a physical thing that needs addressing. Sometimes the spooky corner really does have something scary in it. But developing the habit of looking at yourself first is a valuable thing you can do as a rider. And in midlife, I think that value is amplified. Sometimes you genuinely can't see from inside the ride. You need someone outside of it to reflect back what they are observing. I've seen it in the work I do where someone comes thinking that they have a horse problem, and then we end up somewhere very different. Not because the horse is off the hook, but because the picture is always bigger than what we can see from the saddle. If having that kind of conversation is something you've been thinking about, you can find out more about my sessions at midliferiderproject.substack.com and click on Work with Me. I don't want to wrap this up too neatly today because I don't think there's anything about this topic that's cut and dried. This stuff takes time and a good amount of willingness to look at yourself, which isn't always comfortable. It also takes a relationship with the horse that you may have been cultivating for long enough to actually know what you're seeing. But if there's anything I'd encourage you to take away this week, it's just this. The next time that something isn't working the way you want it to, before you go to fixing the horse, get curious about yourself.
Thank you for spending this time with me. If this episode resonated, I hope you'll join me again next week as we continue riding through this season together. Until then, take good care of yourself and your horse.